All right, welcome in everybody. Hop on in, grab a virtual seat. We are here to talk about line editing today. And I've got Kevin on in the background too.
Hello, hello.
How's everybody doing? I'm curious to know how many of you, this is your first class of the session. We've been doing some AutoCrit 101 sessions the last couple weeks. So today is the, goodness, third session already somehow. It's amazing. We're halfway through. We did planning and drafting first, followed by our developmental editing. And then today we are diving into the technical side of editing, which means your grammar, your typos, your word choice, things that overall improve the technical aspect of your book. So while we are bringing the last of our waiting room guests in here, if you have any questions about dev editing or planning and drafting after watching the replays that we haven't gotten to, feel free to drop them in the comments. And as we go through today, we are going to be pausing to take questions. I know there is a lot that we'll be going over, so don't feel bad to throw in there any questions you have. If you're wondering something, somebody else probably is wondering it as well. And we want this to be a welcome, open demo of how you can use AutoCrit for your line editing, whether this is your first book or whether you're trying to improve your process along the way. All right, so with planning and drafting and dev editing behind us, our content before we start line editing should be solid, which means barring any accidental slips that you find as you go through, you should not be cutting out big sections and revising anymore, just to save yourself the time here, right? So instead, we are shifting over in our purpose to improving the readability and the flow of our work. Readability is going to be what keeps your readers hooked in the page. It makes it easy to read. They sort of absorb all the content that they're reading very easily without having to stop and go, what did the author mean? And then flow means it flows very naturally. Ideally, we don't want readers wanting to put our book down for a break, right? Even in a nonfiction situation, we don't want readers putting our book down and then being like, oh, I have to go read another chapter. We want to write in a way that flows very smoothly, draws those readers in deeper. So one of the things that I hear a lot as an editor, because I'm a member of the editing team, I've been editing for people for over 10 years, is a little confusion on what exactly a line edit is and what it is not. I think there's a little bit of this idea when you first get into writing that a line edit is your one-man editing army. And you might think, I'm sending this to an editor, and the first editor that you're probably going to Google is going to either be a line or a copy editor. And you're going to send it to them and go, it's going to come back perfect. And what you don't understand is that it could be more of a car assembly situation, right? Your dev editor is the one who makes sure that all the pieces are working correctly in your car, mechanically, that the structure is sound. The line editor is the one who's going in and making sure that you have the comfort and the ease of use in the car. The copy editor is the one that makes it look pretty, and then the proofreader's doing the final check to make sure there's no mistakes. So a line editor is not going to take your book from rough draft that you've never developmentally edited and then edit it for you for content and also fix all your typos and also fix your run-on sentences and also fix all these other things. Often there are copy editors who do line editing, line editors who do dev editing, but they are very specific, different processes. And on an average line edit, I will typically go through a book 3 or 4 times. And you'll see why as we get into these today. So don't look at your line edit as the one-man editing army. You have to have everything done. It is okay to still have grammatical errors and typos when you're finished with your line edit. That is what the copy edit is for. The other thing to note is that your line edit is not focused on formatting. We're not ready to format yet. In the line edit phase, you're still going to be making major revisions. It's called a line edit because you're going through the book line by line. You're potentially changing entire paragraphs, layouts, splitting up long run-on paragraphs or long run-on sentences. and getting it ready for that final copy edit. So you don't want to waste your time formatting as you go, and you're not going to be looking for table of contents and updating page numbers or things like that as you go through your line edit. Keep focused on the technical style here today and save the rest for another time. Finally, if you're working with a professional, which is always nice if you're doing this for the first time, we editors love making a living, right? You would not expect an alpha or beta reader to do line editing work for you. A beta reader or an alpha reader is usually looking for content. That's going to be your plot, your pacing, your world building, your character development. And if they are free, especially, don't expect their content to come back with, this is a run-on sentence, this is a run-on paragraph, this doesn't make sense because you switch to MLA style or anything like that here. That is not their job. Now, what you can do with a beta reader is take their feedback and pull some key points that AutoCrit will give you in the summary report that we're going to look at. Some of these words are going to be, it felt slow. That has to do with your pacing. It felt fast. That has to do with your pacing. This was confusing. I don't understand who's talking. That's your dialogue tags. So they're going to give you some subtle feedback, but they're not going to go through and track changes in your work like a human editor or like you can do yourself with AutoCrit, which is why we're here. So I'm going to stop for questions. See what we got. Yeah, hey everybody. Pat, Joy, Christine's first one and Carol's first one, Catherine. And if you missed the last ones and you want to catch up with those, you can do that by going to the calendar and go to the past events section, and they will both be there. Did some of this quite a while ago. Yes, and because today we are focusing on that line level, we're focusing on the readability and the flow. We're not going to get into the technical aspects of a manual of style today. So we're not going to be saying, if I was writing Chicago, would I put an ellipses here or an M dash here? That's more in the copy editing phase. We'll talk a little bit about that next week. Today, though, applies to everybody, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, and whether you're writing UK English or Canadian English or US English. These are going to be similar steps for everyone. All right, did I miss anything, Kevin?
Nope, I think we're all good to keep moving forward on the line editing side.
Yeah, perfect. And if we missed your question, don't worry, we will get back to you. All right, the first thing you need to think about when you get into the line editing phase is, where does your book fit best? What genre is this book going to be marketed toward? Because readers carry unknown expectations subconsciously about the style of the book they write. And I'm going to pull up my AutoCrit tab for you guys and show you how you can tell what your book is very simply. But we also did a in-depth class about finding your genre. So if you're not sure where your genre falls, we can drop the link for you and you can catch up with that there. So this is your AutoCrit homepage for people here the first time. Most of what we're doing today is in the writer's desk, this little tab over here on the left-hand side. And we're going to find our file and open our file. This is one of my books before I edited it and sent it off, so be kind. So in here, if you have already done the developmental editing phase, then underneath the analysis tab in either your fiction or nonfiction analyzer, you should be able to scroll down in the overall tab to a section based on genre. So scroll up a little bit. Genre conformity. So you can ignore the sections that are saying this could be many different genres and all of that. And you're looking for your primary genre. What is this looking like overall? So each chapter consistently employs elements typical of high or epic fantasy. That is going to be my broad genre. If I didn't know it before, thank you, Analyzer, I know it now. This is also a dark/grimdark fantasy. So I know that on my end from the level of gore. Sometimes it will call it out here as well. And it will pull up other elements that could play in. Like there's adventure elements in this book that pop up. I'm not going to publish this as an action adventure, but if I'm looking for subgenres, there they are. So now that I know that this is fantasy and I know it's epic fantasy, I can go up in the top right-hand corner of AutoCrit to the comparing with genre section. And I can either choose to leave it fantasy overall, or I can pick an author whose audience I think would like the content of my book. And in my case, I try to write in a similar style to George R. R. Martin, but because his pacing is a little slower than I like as a reader, I try to run my pacing related reports that we'll get to today against Sanderson's, because Brandon Sanderson has a better flow and pace for my taste. So when I publish my books and I run ads on Amazon or on Facebook, I am running them to readers who like Martin and like Sanderson. And that's why I'm going to choose these people when deciding what kind of averages I want to see. The system will then tell us as we go through our editing how we stand up to the genre or to the author we've chosen. So if we go to the analysis tab and click on the summary report, it's going to give you a score. And that score is how similar you are to the writing style of the person or genre you've chosen. It's not a pass-fail score. You are not going to get a 100%. You probably don't want a 100% because if you got over a certain amount, you're going to be giving up author voice. Even trad authors we have put through the system or who have shared their scores have said that they get in the mid 70s to mid 80s on average. And that's because even when comparing against themselves, some aspects of their work is going to be unique every single time. They're going to talk a little different. They're going to have a little more dialogue. They're going to have a little more showing. Maybe they're going to write to a younger audience for a certain book. So you don't want to be 100% the same as everyone else. You might sound a little robotic. You want to keep that user or that honest author voice that is your own. So there are two scores in here. The direct score, which would give me my score if my book was put up just against Sanderson with nothing else. And then the AutoCrit score, and that's going to add in insight from reviews from professionals that are like, yes, this is at the core things that we see in Martin's books, but readers are trending different ways. Readers don't pick up the same books today. If Tolkien pitched The Hobbit to be traditionally published today, it would get written all up and he would have a much harder time as an unknown author pitching that book today because current readers have different expectations, right? He wasn't established when he went and pitched it the first time around, and it was a different era, and he wrote like the authors of that era. So the plus score is a good way to see those trends. Like, I like this style, but I also want to know what's current. I want to stay relevant. I'm going to scroll down here, and in the overall score box, I can see which areas I really need to work on first. Now, I've been editing a really long time. Don't feel bad if your scores are not 70 and 80% when you put your book through here. I have had books come in and put 50% in here or 35% in here. This is a guide. It shows you where to start in your technical editing journey. If you do something really well, like I have 92% word choice, then I'm going to save that for last because I'm going to knock out the hard stuff first and then come back and skim over the stuff that I'm doing decently well at. And if you're too high, like if I get to about the 95 range, I start to panic. Then I start going through the reports and seeing which ones am I so high on that maybe I want to deviate it up just a little bit, find that sweet spot. So my issue is in strong writing and in pacing most of the time. So if I scroll down, I can see each of these reports broken down. Here's what this means. Less than 5% of my paragraphs are flagged as slow paced. Yay for running it through Sanderson. Versus George R. R. Martin, this is why I choose Sanderson for pacing. George R. R. Martin in a book this size would have had 113 slow-paced paragraphs, and I only have 42. Sanderson would have way lower slow-paced paragraphs. How many words you'd see per paragraph. And we could get down in the weeds here, but we're not going to for the sake of the call today. We are actually going to go ahead and pull up these reports in sort of a structured checklist style way. If you're a pro member, I do have a checklist that you can see in the forums and use to just check off the boxes and ones that you're not ready for, and come back to them later. That way it's not as overwhelming. I hope when I first got in here 5 years ago, there were so many reports and I was jumping all over the place. My biggest recommendation would be, as a fellow writer who uses this system on a regular basis, to have a structured approach. Today, I'm going to work on this report, and this report, and I'm going to give myself permission to not worry about my adverbs today or my other word choices today. I'm going to save that for the copy editing level. Now, if you want to follow along, I believe we have a special running for 50% off your first month of an AutoCrit Pro membership that we can drop in the chat, so that way you can pull up these tools and be working on your own book while we're live and drop any questions you have. Let's see. But now that we know what genre we have, it helps us set our expectations a little better. It's time to edit. Kevin, do we have questions about that before I move on?
Well, one question I think was important. I was going to answer it, but I thought it might be best to show your visual. It was a question of name the different types of edits again. I think you have that first slide where you have the line editing, the dev editing. Let's just step back there maybe.
Yep.
So the dev edit and the line edit, and there's a copy edit, and then I guess proofread's kind of an edit, and then formatting is kind of an edit, depending on what your technical term
is sort of like your final edit. And
yeah,
most of us still want a human touch on our book. AutoCrit, we love our human editors. And what AutoCrit's done for me personally as an author is allow me to skip dev editing, line editing, and copy editing. And I write giant epic fantasies, you guys. My line edits are quoted at about $1,000 a book. So every book, and I've done 10 now through AutoCrit, that I haven't loaded into here has saved me $1,000. That is $10,000. My family got to go to Disney World for the first time as a family this year with the money I didn't spend on editing last year. So my lifetime membership that I bought 5 years ago before I joined AutoCrit's team paid for itself in the first book by not having a line edit. So our goal is to help enable you to self-edit to whichever point you're comfortable. And then you can bring a cleaner piece to your editors. So that way, when we get them, we don't have to charge you as much money to edit them because they're cleaner. We can focus on the things that actually need the human touch, right?
thanks, Catherine.
All right. So let's start. Oh, sorry.
I got one other question that just came in regarding to some of the feedback from AutoCrit. AutoCrit calls what I'm writing a psychological thriller, but objects to the gore at the end. So AutoCrit's going to find a lot of different things with regard to genre as it reads through, especially like the story analyzer. So it's just, I think Catherine has mentioned the beta reader. Treat AutoCrit's feedback as you would treat a beta reader. It might be more gore for some person. And the quote unquote, the AutoCrit computer thinks it might have too much gore. Maybe it thinks it's a horror, right? So treat the feedback not as a black and white thing, but this is what this person feels. Am I right on that one, Catherine?
Absolutely. And don't forget that you can definitely change in between. So just like I edit with Martin for the majority of my writing style, but I keep pacing and momentum for Sanderson, you can say, hey, I want this to be primarily a psychological thriller. So I'm going to put this in the thriller section for most of my editing. And then when it comes to my power words, if you're wanting it to have a horror feel and you want to lean into that, and you're wanting to change the mood, which is something we did in Horror Club on Wednesday, talking about increasing the horror mood in something with your word choice. If you want to do that, then you can change it to horror to run that section of reports, right? So you can pick and choose which ones work best for what you're trying to accomplish. All right, so I recommend starting on a big picture level and then drilling down. You can do this in any order you want. This is just my guide, so don't feel like this is a hard and fast rule. We're going to start on the big picture level. Your big picture level are going to be edits that apply to the whole book. They should all have a consistent POV or point of view, which is what we left off on with developmental editing last week. We should have a consistent tense through your story. The narration should be all third person or, sorry, that's POV, all past tense or all present tense consistently, unless you are trying to go out on a limb and do both, which is something I've been sharing in every one of these classes. Is one of my first series, I made the mistake of having one chapter in first person present tense and one chapter in third person past tense. And now I'm 4 books in and I have one last book to put out. And I have to write the last one that way because I'm not rewriting and re-releasing all these other books. Typically readers like one tense or the other, not both. They like first person because they like being in a character's head, or they like third person because they like the grand sweeping plot, and they like knowing things the readers, like the characters, don't know yet, and seeing how the characters respond. So they're looking for a different experience. And when you give them one POV and then you shift it, there's a potential to make them feel bait and switched, right? So ideally, you're going to have one consistent POV, one consistent tense, and you're going to have a specific pace that you want to apply to your whole book, right? You guys heard me say Martin's is slower paced. He's that older style of writing, that classic fantasy that I do love, but I don't want to write like. Sanderson brings across some of that epicness while also making it faster. So you have to decide, how fast of a read do you want this to be for your readers? Do you want your readers to inhale your 600-page saga in about 2 days, or do you want it to take them 2 months? It's really up to you and how you format your flow, how easy it will be for them to inhale the book. And even on a nonfiction level, you are going to have all of these things. You are going to have a narrator, and that narrator is either going to be talking to the reader. The narrator is going to be talking about the reader for things like self-help books, like if you do this, then we can do this or that. Things that might be happening in your life where I'm guessing that this has happened to you. They're going to be talking about themselves if it's a memoir. So there's going to be a narrator, a lens of some kind that we're reading through, even on nonfiction. And then there's going to be a tense. You don't want your nonfiction memoir to start out, I was 17 the day this happened. So first person past tense. And then about halfway through the book, your memoir shifts to your name is doing this thing. And now you're in third person present tense and you shift it around. So you want to keep that in mind. We're going to be looking at both today. So let's
And
pull up AutoCrit.
one more thing on this too, because we get some questions on this sometimes on the pace. I get this a lot. I think of those 3, Catherine, the pace you can play with a little bit more, but I think now we're talking about being super consistent everywhere. Of course, during special times, inciting incidents, the climactic finale, whatever, there's going to be different times we're going to play with pace. But I think what Catherine is really inferring is that what happens the other 95% of the book, or the other 80 or 90% of the book, right? How consistent are you with, the middle, the midsection, the back? How consistent are you there? Of course, you're going to play with pace to add drama and add excitement, but really, really focus on what do you do for the vast majority of the time and keep it consistent. I think that's what we're getting at here. So don't be confused, like I have to be exactly the same everywhere. That's not the case. You can have the most dramatic gunshot scene, like from The Matrix, where the guy's falling backwards and you see the bullet go really slow out of the gun, because that's just, that's an impact epic piece. That's a scene that you really want to focus on. But there's a lot of other stuff that has to keep going and moving on, to keep it consistent.
Yeah, consistency is key on all 3 of your big picture things for sure. So let me pull AutoCrit up here. There we go, back into my book. And we're going to start with that first one because that's the one we ended on last week. So if you want the deep, in-depth version at the end of last week's, you can go watch that at the end of the dev editing session. But we are going to pick back up there today. So under word choice, there is a POV consistency tab. I wrote the book that you see right here in first person present tense. I decided to launch this book as a third person past tense because grimdark and dark epic fantasies are seen more commonly in that third person past tense POV. And I wanted to appeal to the audience a little more. And I also wanted to be able to get outside the main character's head for this book and show other people, right? So I have over here in this POV report a list of times where I shift from third person into first person or second person. I'm going to toggle on my highlight dialogue button over here on the right-hand side. And I'm going to go through this list, which you can do by clicking on the word itself. Just start going down. Anything that is not in dialogue, I want to change to third person because it means I missed a sentence, I missed a paragraph, I missed something along those lines, and now it is inconsistent. Second person, if you've been on any member events with me, you know how I feel about breaking the fourth wall in a book where you have not been doing that the entire time. There are some books that talk to the readers, like The Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. Talks to the readers from the very beginning and then just keeps talking to them. That's a perfectly valid writing style. And if you do that, great. But if you don't, and you hardly ever make statements to the reader, then you want to make sure you're avoiding second person in your book. There should not be times where your narrator outside of dialogue is telling your reader, you know that feeling when you do XYZ, right? So I'm going to go through this list again, and it's going to pop up every instance. I'm making sure that none of these shifts are happening outside of dialogue. And as I said, I've been doing this for quite a while. This is not as big of an issue for me as my pacing is, which we will see when we get to pacing. But don't feel bad if you come across whole chunks that need to be redone. That is why this is here. That's why this is on the line editing level. So let's say I did come across one. You don't have to close your menu on the left. You can just say, okay, it is only a half lie, as I strongly suspected. If I came across that in this report, then I would know to go in and change it to both that past tense and then also take this I out because it's not in dialogue. So she should not be talking about herself in first person, and either change it to her name or change it to a pronoun for her name. All right. Under strong writing is where you're going to find the tense consistency report, and I would edit through your file very similarly to what we just did with POV. Again, you're looking for the POVs that you have not chosen to write this specific book in. And if you come across any of those that are not in, you need to fix them. The other good thing about dialogue is sometimes when you're doing a POV shift in a book, you can accidentally shift in dialogue when it's supposed to be, most of the dialogue is supposed to be present tense because the characters are being quoted word for word as they talk. So even if your book is a past tense book, the quotes are going to be present tense. So there could be times where you accidentally end up with a past tense statement in a piece of dialogue. So don't disregard the fact that this is dialogue as a reason to not edit it. Your dialogue definitely needs to be line edited, just like every other part of your book. If you don't do it while you're doing the rest of your book, then you have to come back and do it on its own later. I've done both ways. I personally don't really like saving the dialogue and editing it by itself later. So it's about how you work best, really. So this is supposed to be a past tense book now, but if this was supposed to, if I was looking for future tense, he'll, I'm making sure that I've gotten rid of every instance of he'll do this, she'll do that, I will do this, I'm going to this, except in that dialogue again, where it's supposed to be the exception. And then pacing. So pacing is going to be under its own tab because yay, pacing deserves its own tab. Now, pacing affects a lot more than you would think. If you get reviews from readers saying it was slow in the beginning was slow, your first thought might be, oh, I've messed up the developmental side. I don't have the inciting incident fast enough, or I wait to introduce the meet cute too long. But sometimes it's not your content. Sometimes your content's fine and you just have a lot of bulky paragraphs in the beginning, and a reader opens it, they see those big paragraphs and they go into like brain freeze mode because they don't want to read an entire book of clunky paragraphs. and you're setting the expectation right there in that opening. So we can do pacing overall, which is where I'm going to start today. Click on that. And then you can go either by chapter or by paragraph or by sentence to drill down deeper to make sure that you're splitting up these long run-on paragraphs. If you have a chapter that's 10,000 words and the rest of your chapters are 3,000 words, you have a run-on chapter. You probably need to split it up somewhere. If you have a paragraph that's really, really long, as in it takes up an entire page on a cell phone, if you're looking at it on an ebook, then you have a run-on paragraph, and you should probably break that up for the ease of reading. So here are the slow-paced paragraphs it says I have. George R. R. Martin would have 113, so I'm under him. Sanderson would have less. I don't want to take any more out in this case because I want to meet certain genre expectations at the top. So all of the AutoCrit reports are going to have two sections to pay attention to when you're doing technical edits. The top is the average compared to the genre or author you've chosen versus how many you have. You can have about the same, you can have more, or you can have less. If you have less than average, and I'd say less than about 15 to 25% the average, then you can't fix that by taking more out. You're going to drop that score even lower. So if I go down here and I click on this paragraph, for a moment, the exiled former heiress worried that she'd made a terrible mistake, and then on and on it goes. It's followed by a really short paragraph, which sort of balances it out, and it's why I decided to keep it, because it's sandwiched between these two shorter paragraphs. If I then split this paragraph up here, that's going to get rid of one of my slow-paced paragraphs, and it's going to drop me even further from the Martin average. So if I want to write like Martin, I've just made it worse. Instead, I need to be doing the reverse. If I want to read like Martin and not like Sanderson, I need to see which paragraphs I can combine because I probably have too many short paragraphs somewhere. And you will see that in your paragraph variation tab. You can click on that and it will show you each paragraph you have. Let's see here. And then I would start scrolling down for clumps of short paragraphs and see if I can't combine those to make the pacing a little longer, slow down that pace just a little bit. Ideally, you're going to have a reverse waterfall in pretty much any genre. You're going to have more short paragraphs than anything else, and then you're going to have less and less all the way down. You probably should not have 100+ word paragraphs unless you're writing giant epic fantasy or epic sci-fi like a space opera. If you're writing a memoir, writing romance, writing mystery, especially writing a thriller, readers are not going to be looking for 100+ word paragraphs. So here it says the average paragraph length for Martin is 44 words. The average paragraph length for me is 34 words. I'm happy with this amount. I'm not going to worry about it too much. But if I'm trying to collect the pacing, I can scroll down and see every individual paragraph in my whole book. And here's a clump of relatively short paragraphs, all close together. So I might click here and say, okay, do I want to combine these? In this case, I can't because they both start with dialogue and dialogue takes its own line. However, I can definitely combine ones that aren't dialogue. So let me go down to this one. There was less groping then is a response to this quote. So I could technically onto the end of the quote, since it's not bookend dialogue where it opens with a quote, has a tag and ends with a quote. So you have some creative decisions to make here. One of the things I love about AutoCrit is it will not write or rewrite any portion of your book for you. And the reason it doesn't just autocorrect your book and be like, here's your clean book, is because you can have a very different approach to maintaining your voice and your style when fixing issues like this, right? I might say, I don't care that I'm below George R. R. Martin. I want a faster paced book, and that's fine with me. Or I could say, no, I do want more in there, and I would approach it very differently if I wanted more. And if your book is slow, if you have sections or chapters that are very slow paced, then you can do the opposite. go back to the giant long chapter. So I'm going to find one of these 100 plus word chapters here and say, I want to cut this down. This doesn't need to be 100 words. I'm going to skim over this paragraph and I'm going to look for a few key points. What is the purpose of the paragraph when it starts? And when that purpose changes, the paragraph should split. It starts off describing an action. Rowan drew in a breath. When I shift to focusing on a different person, that paragraph should shift. When I shift away from describing his action to describing a setting or a place or a feeling or a reaction, or I introduce dialogue, those are all changes in the purpose of that paragraph. And that's when I need to split it up. So he's chanting in a deep breath in the second sentence, and then there's smoke coming from his arms. Now I shift here from describing him to describing the smoke. That's where I would split the paragraph if I had to split it, because it's a clear difference from when I'm talking about Rowan to talking about the smoke. And then it goes on to talk about what the smoke does for the rest of the paragraph. So that would be its own separate chunk. I hope that makes a little bit of sense there. And then, of course, there is, as I said, sentence level as well. So if you have an issue with run-on sentences, I do. I have a problem with run-on sentences. Then you can do the same thing. And just like paragraphs, sentences should split when the purpose of the sentence shifts. This is all about purpose when you're deciding how to go about fixing pacing issues. If you're combining it, you're making the choice to slow it down. If you're splitting it up, you're making the choice to speed up the flow a little bit. So here's my sentence. I have a 40 plus word. I have 13 40 plus word sentences. What? All right. So yay for one of them right here. But how many times you want to describe something, how many clauses you put together is going to be dependent on what that sentence's purpose is. I don't need to go on and on and on about the smoke. I can start cutting this up a little bit. The smoke grew heavier until the weight matched the pressure of the hands which held her into place. So that should be split new paragraph and not a comma, for example, and go ahead and fix that. Into every scratch and puncture wound, and then so on and so forth. It goes on. Every time that purpose changes, I'm putting a new spot there. If you tend to overuse semicolons, which is one of my crutches, that is also a good indicator. Ask yourself if what comes after the semicolon exists to clarify what came before the semicolon. If the second full sentence, it has to be a complete sentence that can stand on its own in order to follow a semicolon. If the second clause, the second independent clause there, could stand on its own and isn't there to explain what you said before the semicolon, then they need to be two separate sentences. And my editor would be so proud of me if she heard me say that right now. She's cut out so many semicolons from my word. And M dashes are my replacement for semicolons. Same thing. If it's not going to be an explanation, a continuation of that semicolon's first clause, then I don't need to put that M dash there. It needs to be its own sentence. All right. Questions about the big picture? Ooh, lots of comments.
I don't think there's anything that I didn't, hopefully I grabbed most people's questions and concerns. One of them was when we were doing the comparison, is that all the authors we have? No, we add authors all the time. If you have any suggestions, reach out to us in the chat bubble and say, hey, I wish you would have this or this person or whoever. We're always compiling in new lists, and we do release batches of new information for the purposes of comparison all the time. So please feel free to let us know in the chat. If you have anybody you suggest. The other question is, are we going to hit repetition today, Catherine? I'm not sure if we are or not. I don't think that's going to be too much for one session. We are going to
talk about repetition today.
We are going to make it there. Okay, good.
Now, repetition is technically the beginning of copy editing. So we're going to touch on a line editing level of repetition today, but then we're going to open next week's copy editing with word level repetition. So if you're looking for repetition on phrases, like something you just say way too much, we're getting that today. And then we'll do the word level next week. All right, so it's time to go deeper. Once we've got our main form of the book done, right? We have the pacing the way we want it. We've made sure our POV is the way it's supposed to be. We've made sure we're not jumping tenses all over the place, and that we are good to go. We are ready to go into telling. Telling takes up the majority of your time in line editing. A lot of what you are doing is fixing times you over tell something. There are 3 different reports we're going to touch on today, specifically designed for different kinds of telling that we do as authors. And telling means summarized information that we want to make sure the reader knows. And this can come across in many different ways. So that can be in the form of dialogue tags. If you use a dialogue tag every single time someone talks, you are trying so hard to make sure that your readers get it right and attribute that quote to the right person that it starts to read like a report more than an easy, naturally flowing novel. You don't want to cut out your dialogue tags altogether, though, because then you're opening the door for confusion. Dialogue tags have a purpose, and that purpose is to make sure that we know who's talking. And in a group of 2 people, once you've established them, you're only going to sprinkle them in every once in a while if a statement could be unclear as far as who is supposed to be saying this. Or if you're wanting to make a tone clear where the verbiage alone isn't enough to convey the feelings that went with that quote, right? If you're late for work and then you read the quote, "Why are you late again?" ? And there's no tag. I don't know if the boss is going, "Why are you late again?" and they're angry or frustrated, or if they're going, "Why are you late again? Like, are you okay? I'm worried about you. You've been late all this time. What's going on?" I can't tell that based on the word alone or even the context. So I have to have a dialogue tag, preferably with an adverb in this case, in order to understand that. The other form that comes into play with your telling early on is how many sentence starters you have that open with names or open with pronouns, because that is our nature trying to report things just right, to make sure that you know from the beginning of the sentence who is doing the action, when a lot of times that can be implied based on the sentence before it or the setup leading up to the sentence. So I'm going to show you the report you can use for each of these things. They're very easy to use. The dialogue tags report is going to be under the dialogue tab. There's 2 different things that you're going to look for in dialogue. The adverbs we just talked about, we're going to come back to those in copy editing in more detail. Those are going to be places where you don't have enough adverbs in your dialogue compared to the average for your genre, which means that there could be potentially places that the tone of voice is not clear for your readers, unless you're showing it another way, like body language, facial expressions, something like that. Dialogue tags itself, said and asked, are the industry accepted most used tags. And this is because they are invisible to readers. Readers are so used to seeing them that unless you literally use them every single quote enough to make them realize, why do they keep saying this over and over and over? Most readers skim over them and they don't think anything about them at all. The others, your saidisms, as my college professor called them, are there to be forms of emphasis. They should be pulling an attention to something that is unusual. So if they're on a battlefield and you put "duck!" exclamation mark, you don't need "he said," you don't need "he yelled," because they're on the battlefield. Our brains are going to know that equals loud noise, and the exclamation mark drives that home. So I can just let that sentence sit unless it's unclear who's saying it. But if someone's on the battlefield and they grab their buddy's collar and they yank them down and they go, "Duck, he whispered," that needs the tag, because there is no way in that context I would have imagined him whispering this. That is something unusual. That's something that I need to draw attention to in my tag. So it is completely fine to have those when you need them. And don't forget to use them instead of all caps for shouting. In most books, especially nonfiction, all caps is just not used except for signs and labels on things. It'll be written in all caps in most major style guides. One exclamation mark, just one, is plenty followed by a strong tag. Wailed, wept, shrieked, screamed. Whatever you want to put there to follow it up will drive the emphasis home much better than the word in all caps and then 5 exclamation marks. Same thing for said and asked. If you feel like it's unclear who could be speaking, you want to make sure you put that in. If not, you can cut it out. So overall, I have a dialogue tag problem using others because my mother was an editor and used to say, don't overuse said and asked, vary it up. I use dialogue tags too much as it is, and I need to go through and cut these out, right? I have 389, so overall, I'm actually below average on how many tags I use, but I want to shift some of those back to said and asked. So very important. I don't want to cut out tags overall because I'm under average, but I do want to change them from these other emphasizing ones to said and asked so that the readers don't get annoyed with how much I'm using these other phrases. So I can do that by scrolling down here and saying, oh gosh, why does she cry things 24 times? All right, here we go. Death, she cried. Narya cried. Okay, we can start shifting some of these out. She cried reaching for her mother. Find your little pet things and work through it. Heat. Truett. Said is fine here because there's already an exclamation mark. He's in a quiet place. The fact that the bird is there in a quiet place with him implies the exclamation mark means he's shouting. So there's no point in me saying he cried it out. He shouted out. I can just make this said, and that'll give me one more said, one less cried. So you're going to work through those and just make sure that they're balanced, that you have more said and asked than you have your other tags, and that you do have tags when it be confusing. Books that have no tags through the whole thing can be very confusing to read and very frustrating as a reader, especially if there's more than one person. And then the initial sentence starters are going to be under word choice. Your initial pronouns and names, as well as the sentence starters, are side by side right here. So go to initial pronouns and names. This is going to pull up all the sentences that start with a name or start with a pronoun. And you don't want every single sentence you have to be, John did this. John went here. John was happy. John felt this way. John blah, blah, blah. At some point, there are too many Johns. Let's shift the sentence up. If we establish in sentence number 1 that John did this, then sentence number 2, unless you talk about somebody else, we're going to assume you're still talking about John. So you don't need to say John for the second one or for the third one, right? If you shift POV, you can shift to the name in that sentence somewhere, and it doesn't have to be the beginning, right? He looked at his friend Sam, and then you don't need Sam over and over and over and over and over again. Just keep it consistent. A name until they're not the ones doing the action, and then give me the name again, and then more of the action, and things like that. So here you can see again, your top is how many they would have as far as sentences that start with an initial pronoun or name, how many you have, and then you can start working through. Mine is not starting with names, mine is starting with pronouns. I don't need 3 sentences, 1, 2, 3, boom, 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 that start with she, like that. Especially this one back to back. She, even this, she opened her mouth. I can change this to opening her mouth, comma, and then put my pronoun there. Opening her mouth, she tried to thank the woman. Changes up the variation, changes up the feel, the flow of that so that it just flows a little better. Feels less like I'm reporting about somebody's day.
One question right on that one, Catherine, while you were on the initial pronoun or names report, you had a question about that they're not seeing their character names listed. You have to add your character names into the system. So if you don't mind, Catherine, can you show where to click that is so you can see that? So the system doesn't know who is a character and who isn't a character. We rely on the author to tell us your main character names. Otherwise, you could have things like watermelon and I don't know, something else being a character name is another character.
I have no character names right now because I have not launched, like added all these in.
So
Under
like, yeah,
custom word lists
yep.
here.
There's also a link at
Right.
the bottom of this report as well too, Catherine. I think you could drop it in there. Same, it links to the same spot. But yeah,
Oh, okay. So we got either doing it this way, go to the menu, add the name. There's Naria.
and that,
There's Rowan. And
and then you'll
it
run
will
it
start there.
again, and it'll find those.
The
Rerun the report.
rerun will be my names. It's thinking about it. I use her name a lot, so I know it's gonna be bad, you guys. Oh, so
So
now I've
now
got
scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see the names 214 times.
200.
And that's the little
Told you
wheel
it's
right
gonna be
there.
bad, you guys. 214 sentences that start with her name.
If you see that little setting wheel next to initial names, Catherine, that's the other way you can get there. You can click there or there. Either way will pop up your option to add the names.
Yeah.
So yeah, by all means, use the report. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It'll save you a lot of time.
The next thing we're doing to shift out of telling is going into getting rid of generic descriptions. Generic descriptions are where you tell the reader a summary of how something smells, sounds, looks, feels, but you don't actually just imply it with your word choice, right? So under word choice, under generic descriptions, it's going to pull up a list of things that you can click on to go through and make sure that you tell us, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? Instead of saying she smells nice, what is nice to this character? She smells like lavender and vanilla. What are the words here? So I go down into looked. They looked happy. They looked sad. Well, why did they look happy? Why did they look sad? That all plays back into showing versus telling as well. So this is sort of your intro. So go from your dialogue or your dialogue tags to your initial sentence starters. Make sure that you're letting the sentence flow on its own without having to report who's doing it at the very beginning. And then shift into your descriptions and ask yourself, what is nice? What is bad? What is good? How large? Because I use large a lot. A large, boisterous group of men. Well, what's large to her? Was large 10, 20, 50, 100? If this is one of the goddesses speaking, she doesn't care if it's 100 mortal men. She's going to be looking at a group of 1,000 men calling them large. So that is all going to be subjective, and you have to be specific for your readers, or else you're going to leave it up to reader interpretation and they'll plug their own thing in. Especially important if you write fantasy and you've got them all in an N. So you want to go deeper for your 5 senses. Make sure that if you use sense-related words, what is the taste? What exactly are they eating? What are they hearing in that room? Go beyond sight, which is our first instinct, and go into what does it feel like? What does it smell like? And just go deeper. Now, showing versus telling. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on here today because this could be an entire workshop in and of itself, and AutoCrit offers it as a workshop in and of itself. Showing versus telling is giving us a situation where you're describing the scene, describing the characters, describing expressions, and leaving us to figure out the feelings on our own versus explicitly telling us the feeling and then not showing us what led to that statement. On the left-hand side, we got an angry couple, or you got an angry woman in this couple. And then on the right, he could tell she was angry. Well, how could he tell she was angry? It's her body language. Her back is to him. She wouldn't meet his gaze. When he tried to talk to her, she stayed silent. Those are all powerful hints that she is mad at you, dude. And you don't need to say he could tell she was angry. You can show him trying to talk to her and her not reply. Show her turn her shoulder to him. Show these other things. And I was putting this slide together earlier today, and my husband was sitting next to me, and he goes, "It's not like he could tell why she was angry anyway." So now that's going to be stuck in my head every time I see he could tell she was angry. Well, how? How in the world did he know? Show us their expression. Show us what it is that the character in front of them is seeing in order to make this deeper. And there's an entire report in AutoCrit for showing versus telling that you can use. I spent a whole lot of time here And as I said, we're not going to get bogged down there too much today, but if you want it, here it is in AutoCrit under your strong writing tab. And you'll go down the list and make sure that you watch the top, that there does need to be a certain amount of summarized telling explanations for things, especially when you pair it with dialogue, right? I'd never seen her so angry is a valid phrase. It doesn't feel weird. And it adds to the observation of her back is to me. She's not answering me. I've never seen her so angry she wouldn't answer me before. That's a tell, but it's a needed tell. And if you write for younger audiences or you write nonfiction, you are going to use a lot more telling. So be aware of what you're comparing with genre says is the norm for you there. All right. Any questions on showing versus telling? Because we only have one last thing that we're going to touch on today, besides the redundancy statement, which I'll tag on at the end here. And we are going to polish up the line editing level for our readers. So once we do the big picture level, our POV, pacing, tenses, once we do our small level, focus in on that telling, focus in on showing, make those descriptions specific. We are going to knock out cliches. Mean 3 different things. Most of the time we hear cliche and what we think of is a trope, the chosen one. But in the case of line editing, a cliche also means idioms or profanity or other things that are being used that aren't always going to be used by a demographic of people. And so AutoCrit's not going to tell you to cut those things out of your book, but it is going to point out that you have those things in your book so that you can decide whether or not they fit there. So because I write epic fantasy, you saw that icon was drop the mic. I wouldn't use the phrase drop the mic in my epic fantasy because they don't have microphones. That idiom is meaningless. Unless you want to purposefully go in and leave them in because you want to appeal to our Earth readers, there are other ways I could get that same sentiment across, like drop the spear. Whatever I want to do, sometimes I want to get creative with it. Sometimes you want to use a different idiom that's more commonly known from that time period, right? Be gone from me. Like, I'm done talking to you versus drop the mic. But you can go through here. Now, the system's looking for specific words. So sometimes it will highlight things that aren't being used as a cliche, like get out of here isn't always used as get out of here. Sometimes it can be a literal, we need to get out of here, and you can skip it and move on. But go down the list a little bit and ask yourself, would they be saying this? White as snow. Do they have snow in that world? Does this make sense? If you're writing nonfiction, especially, watch your cliches. Cliches can become dated very quickly, and you're looking for cliches that are probably going to stand the test of time, or you're going to have to come back to your book and keep re-updating it over and over, right? There's a reason that we see self-help books re-release every 5 or 10 years because they want the new audience. They want the new phrases, and they change these things out. So if you do have those books, you can go in here and say, oh yeah, I need to replace some of these things with slay, right? No more word up, was up. I'm aging myself a lot right now. So go through your cliches and just work through those. And then we talked about redundancies. This is going to fall into that polishing phase as well. So there are sentence level redundancies, and then there's also word related redundancies. The first one that you see right here next to cliche is going to be on the word or small phrase level. And then you should also have one, I think, under your repetition. Yeah, for phrase frequency. This is the one that I would look at for line editing. My poor book is like, no, I'm done with you right now. But you're going to go through your phrases and make sure that you don't have a phrase you overuse. It's okay to give somebody a specific line that they're known for saying, but they shouldn't say it every single time they have a piece of dialogue. It's also okay to have things like, I know I do whirling and twirling. She whirled into the room. She twirled into the room. But I don't need to have that I think, what did we say in my first book? Like 57 times. So watch for your phrases, because those are going to have to be replaced on a line level with something else, which is why they are going to be in your line editing portion. All right, any questions? Because that about wraps us up for today. I'm happy to stay on a few extra minutes and answer questions for anybody.
We just had one about catchphrases as we talk about redundancies and cliches and repeated phrases. Well, verbal tics. They say like a lot or pretty much or something like that. That's always an interesting one because you do have to set your character, right? Catherine, this is like part of character building. That this is part of who they are, is how they talk. Like a teenage girl says like a lot or something like that. But you always have to remember that people read that. You're forcing your audience to read that every time you write it. So do it enough to get the point across that they have that verbal tick, but don't do it enough to annoy the heck out of your reader, because it becomes just as annoying as it does in real life. So be super cautious with your verbal ticks and things like that. That's from my perspective as when I'm reading a book, like I'll put it down. If I can't stand listening to the character quote unquote talk to me because of their verbal ticks, then I'll put it away. So you got to be super careful with that. And that's a judgment call.
Yep. Yeah. I 100% agree. I think it comes down to how they talk. There's actually a pro member event that you can watch the replay of live if you're a pro member. A replay of, not live, that we did live about editing dialogue without losing your voice, because characters can each have a unique voice and they need their own voice. They don't need to sound the same. If I pick up a book, I know who is talking when I read The Hobbit based on the word choices Bilbo Baggins uses versus the word choices that Bomber uses versus the word choices that Gandalf uses. I don't need tags all the time to know who's talking. So you want that difference. And that means dialogue is not going to be perfect all the time. And that's okay. When I say we edit dialogue, I'm not saying make it perfect and grammatically correct all the time, because nobody talks like that. But definitely make an effort to go through and make sure that you don't have characters doing giant run-on paragraphs of dialogue, giant run-on sentences without pausing for a breath, or missing adverbs to break things up, or that they're talking in the wrong tense and you have them talking in past tense instead of in present tense. All of those things still need to be done even in dialogue. And so I would include, while you're doing that, have your little style guide in your notes if you don't remember it, or put it under your builder under characters and say this character talks with this accent, or they say this phrase on a regular basis, and then divvy it up. Like I said, we don't need to hear, as Kevin was saying, you don't need to hear the same phrase over and over and over. We know it's them. Maybe when they enter the scene, they say it, and that's how we know that they've entered the scene.
Yeah, be super careful with your accents too, because there's nothing that'll turn me off worse than somebody trying to grammatically write in a Southern accent or something. Oh my goodness, please don't. You can do it little bits and pieces, like use the word y'all and things like that. That goes a long way besides trying to misspell words on purpose to get point across that somebody has a Boston accent. Please don't. Just don't do it.
You don't have to phonetically misspell something either to get across a word. And I do write with Southern accents in my book, Being Born and Raised from the South, but I have read plenty of books that get Southern accents way wrong, and they're hyphenated weird, and they're spelled out phonetically. Let the word just be the word, and add on that she has a Southern drawl in your tag.
Exactly. And then the reader's mind will take it from there, and they'll apply their version, what the ideal amount of Southern accent is in the reader's mind. They'll just do it naturally. So just trust your reader on that for sure.
Yeah.
It's huge. I think I had one other question. I can't remember what it was, but I think we're really, like I said, we're running short on time. So if you have, we'll do another session next week, right, Catherine?
Yep, we've got copy editing coming next week. For anybody who's interested, next week is going to be on that word level. So this was that broad flow readability level. And now that we've gone through it, hopefully everybody understands why I said, don't expect to do a line edit and then go publish your book tomorrow. It still needs the copy edit. There's a purpose. We'll spend a lot of time doing lovely things like adverbs next week. So please come back for tips on that. And the checklist, I think Kevin already put on there, is in the pro member forum. So if you are a pro member and you want to see my checklist for every stage, this is my personal list that I go through, and I'm like, check mark this, check mark that. Did I do this report? I'm going to ignore these other reports.
There's the checklist right there. And
All right. Did I miss anything? Did I get
I
everybody?
think we're good for this session. Well, like I said, we'll be back next week. Keep your questions coming. I really had a good time helping you guys today.
Yeah,
I
thank you
love
all
these
so
one-on-one
much. Thank you,
sessions.
Kevin. This has been great. Again, if you missed the first couple, you can watch the replay. If you came in late today, you can watch the replay. And send us questions you have in the bottom right-hand corner of AutoCrit. There is a chat bubble. If you get going in any of these reports and you don't know what to do with the data, or you have trouble finding the report that you wanted to use for something, please message us, because that's why we're here. We are happy to help you find what you need. All
Yes, because
right. Thanks so much,
we
everybody.
just covered so much in this session. I mean, we could focus just on dialogue easily for an hour, right? We could focus just on these other. So we're trying to give you guys, a little bit of breadth here of what it is we can help you with. But there's definitely a lot more underneath what we covered today.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thanks,
Saturday.
everybody.
Bye.